Lieutenant Commander Sarah Mitchell had always been different from other women in the Navy. At 28, she was one of the youngest officers to lead a specialized reconnaissance unit, and her tactical brilliance had earned respect even among the most hardened SEALs. Her team trusted her completely, following her into the most dangerous missions across hostile territories in Afghanistan. The morning of March 15th started like any other operation. Sarah's unit received intelligence about a high-value target hiding in a remote mountain compound near the Pakistan border. The mission seemed routine: gather intel, confirm the target's location, and report back to base. Sarah had led dozens of similar operations without incident. Her team of 8 specialists prepared their equipment with practiced efficiency. Staff Sergeant Martinez checked communications gear while Corporal Johnson verified GPS coordinates. Sarah reviewed satellite images one final time, noting potential escape routes and defensive positions. The compound sat nestled in a valley surrounded by steep rocky walls, accessible only through a narrow mountain pass. As dawn broke over the rugged landscape, Sarah's convoy of 3 armored vehicles departed the forward operating base. Radio chatter was minimal as they navigated winding mountain roads, maintaining operational security protocols. The journey to their observation point would take 4 hours through increasingly dangerous terrain. Halfway to their destination, Sarah's vehicle hit an improvised explosive device. The blast flipped their armored truck, sending it tumbling down a steep ravine. When the dust settled, Martinez found himself trapped but conscious in the wreckage. He could hear Johnson calling for Sarah, but received no response from the front of the vehicle. Emergency teams arrived within hours, but Sarah's body was nowhere to be found. The explosion had blown out the front section of the truck, and debris was scattered across hundreds of yards of rocky terrain. Search teams combed the area for 3 days, finding fragments of her uniform and personal effects, but no trace of Sarah herself. The official investigation concluded that Lieutenant Commander Mitchell had been killed in the explosion, her remains likely scattered by the blast or carried away by the mountain winds that frequently swept through the valley. Her family received the devastating news, and Sarah was posthumously awarded the Purple Heart for her service and sacrifice. Her memorial service at Arlington National Cemetery drew hundreds of fellow service members. Sarah's parents, Robert and Helen Mitchell, accepted the folded flag with trembling hands as a Navy chaplain spoke about their daughter's courage and dedication. Her younger brother, Mark, also serving in the Navy, struggled to accept that his invincible sister was truly gone. But Sarah hadn't died that day. The explosion had thrown her clear of the vehicle, leaving her unconscious and severely injured on a rocky ledge 50 feet below the road. When she awakened hours later, she was disoriented and suffering from a traumatic brain injury that left her memory fragmented and unclear. A local Afghan family found her wandering their village 3 days later, speaking broken English and unable to remember her name or how she had arrived there. The family, led by an elderly man named Rashid, took pity on the injured foreign woman and nursed her back to health in secret, knowing that harboring an American soldier could bring deadly consequences from Taliban forces in the area. For weeks, Sarah drifted in and out of consciousness as her physical wounds slowly healed. The head injury had damaged her memory centers, leaving her with only fleeting glimpses of her past life. She remembered fragments, images of military training, faces of people she couldn't name, and a persistent feeling that she belonged somewhere else, somewhere important. Rashid's daughter, Amina, who had studied nursing before the war, tended to Sarah's injuries with careful precision. She cleaned infected wounds, set a broken arm, and gradually helped Sarah regain her strength. The family communicated through gestures and the few English words Amina knew, slowly building trust with their mysterious patient. As Sarah's physical recovery progressed, disturbing memories began surfacing. She recalled explosions, gunfire, and the faces of soldiers who seemed familiar but remained nameless. These flashbacks were accompanied by intense headaches and moments of panic that left her exhausted and confused about reality. The Taliban maintained a strong presence in the region, conducting regular patrols through villages suspected of harboring foreign enemies. Rashid knew that discovery would mean death for his entire family, but his moral code wouldn't allow him to abandon the wounded woman. He constructed a hidden compartment beneath their modest home, where Sarah could hide during dangerous periods. Winter arrived early that year, bringing harsh mountain weather that made travel nearly impossible. Sarah remained hidden with the family, slowly learning basic Dari and helping with household tasks as her strength returned. She developed a close bond with Amina's young children, who accepted her presence without question or fear. During long winter nights, Sarah experienced vivid dreams filled with military operations, tactical planning, and combat scenarios that felt intensely real. She began to understand that she had been a soldier, possibly an important one, but the specific details remained frustratingly out of reach. Her dreams suggested she had led others into battle, making life and death decisions that affected many people. Spring brought renewed Taliban activity and increased danger for the family harboring her. Rashid decided they could no longer safely keep Sarah hidden, but releasing her into the mountains would likely mean certain death. The family faced an impossible choice between their own safety and their moral obligation to protect the woman they had come to care for deeply. After 8 months of hiding, Sarah's memory began returning in powerful waves that left her gasping and disoriented. The first major breakthrough came during a Taliban raid on a neighboring village. As explosions echoed across the valley and gunfire erupted in the distance, Sarah suddenly remembered her military training with crystal clarity. Her tactical instincts kicked in automatically. She positioned Rashid's family in the safest part of their home, barricaded the doors, and prepared improvised weapons from household items. When Taliban fighters approached their compound, Sarah used hand signals she somehow remembered to coordinate the family's movements, keeping them hidden and silent until danger passed. That night, more memories flooded back. She remembered her name, her rank, and fragments of her final mission. The devastating realization hit her. Her team believed she was dead, her family had mourned her, and she had been living as a ghost for nearly a year. The weight of this knowledge was crushing, but she still couldn't remember enough details to find her way back to her old life. Rashid noticed the change in their guest immediately. Sarah moved differently now, with purpose and military bearing that hadn't been there before. She began asking questions about American forces in the region, trying to piece together information that might help her return home. But the remote location and ongoing conflict made any contact with U.S. military impossible. The Taliban's grip on the region tightened as fighting intensified. Supply lines were cut, communication was nearly impossible, and Rashid's village found itself caught between opposing forces. Sarah realized her presence endangered the family that had saved her life, and she began planning her departure despite their protests. During her time with the family, Sarah had learned to survive in the harsh mountain environment. She understood local customs, spoke enough Dari to communicate basic needs, and had developed the physical endurance necessary for mountain travel. More importantly, her military training was fully restored, giving her skills that few people possessed for navigating hostile territory. Her opportunity came when a group of refugees fled through their village, heading toward the Pakistani border where they hoped to find safety in refugee camps. Sarah convinced Rashid to let her join the group, promising to find a way to send help to his family once she reached safety. The journey to Pakistan took 3 weeks through some of the most dangerous terrain in the region. Sarah traveled disguised as a local woman, her face covered and her military bearing carefully hidden. She helped the refugee group navigate treacherous mountain passes and avoid Taliban patrols, using her tactical knowledge to keep everyone safe. At night, around small cooking fires hidden in rocky crevices, Sarah listened to stories from other refugees. Many were former government workers, teachers, or professionals fleeing Taliban persecution. Their accounts helped her understand how dramatically the situation had deteriorated since her disappearance, and why her family had been unable to search for her. The refugee camp in Pakistan was a sprawling collection of tents and temporary structures housing thousands of displaced people. Conditions were harsh, with limited food, water, and medical care. Sarah initially stayed within the refugee community, unsure how to reveal her identity without endangering others or creating international incidents. For several months, she worked with relief organizations providing aid to refugees. Her leadership skills and ability to communicate in multiple languages made her valuable to humanitarian groups operating in the camp. She used this position to carefully gather information about American military operations and diplomatic presence in the region. Her break came when she encountered a Red Cross worker named Dr. James Peterson, an American physician volunteering in the camp. Sarah carefully approached him, revealing just enough of her story to establish trust. Dr. Peterson was skeptical at first, But Sarah's detailed knowledge of military protocols and classified information convinced him she was telling the truth. Dr. Peterson contacted the American consulate in Islamabad, but navigating the bureaucracy proved frustratingly slow. Sarah had been officially declared dead. Her case was closed, and proving her identity required extensive documentation that simply didn't exist. Meanwhile, she remained trapped in the refugee camp as various agencies tried to verify her claims. The process became more complicated when intelligence agencies became involved. Sarah's disappearance and survival raised questions about what information she might have been exposed to during her time in Taliban-controlled territory. Security officials wanted to thoroughly debrief her before allowing her return to the United States. During this bureaucratic limbo, Sarah learned about changes in her unit and the SEAL team she had worked with. Several of her former colleagues had been killed in action. Others had retired or transferred, and new leadership had taken over many of the programs she had helped develop. Her tactical innovations had been abandoned, and training protocols she had pioneered were no longer being used. She also discovered that her brother Mark had been killed in a helicopter crash 6 months after her presumed death. The news devastated her, adding crushing guilt to her already overwhelming emotional burden. She had missed his funeral, been unable to support her parents through their grief, and now faced the prospect of returning to a family forever changed by tragedy. After 4 months of investigation and verification, American officials finally confirmed Sarah's identity through DNA comparison with samples provided by her parents. The news of her survival sent shockwaves through military and political circles, as her case represented one of the most remarkable survival stories in modern military history. Preparations began for her return to the United States, but Sarah insisted on one final request. She asked for permission to arrange aid for Rashid's family, who had risked everything to save her life. Through military channels and humanitarian organizations, she coordinated the delivery of medical supplies, food, and equipment to their remote village, fulfilling her promise to repay their kindness. The flight home was surreal for Sarah. 2.5 years had passed since the explosion that changed everything. She was returning to a world that had moved on without her, to a family that had already grieved her death, and to a military that might no longer have a place for someone with her unique and complicated history. The military transport plane touched down at Andrews Air Force Base on a cold November morning. Sarah stared out the small window at the familiar landscape of her homeland, feeling like a stranger returning to a foreign country. 2.5 years of survival in Afghanistan had changed her in ways she was only beginning to understand. Her parents waited in a secure area of the base, accompanied by military officials and medical personnel. Robert Mitchell had aged dramatically since Sarah last saw him, his hair completely gray and deep lines etched around his eyes. Helen Mitchell clutched a photograph of Sarah in her naval uniform, the same photo that had been displayed at her memorial service. The reunion was overwhelming for everyone involved. Helen sobbed uncontrollably while Robert stood frozen, unable to believe his daughter was actually alive. Sarah felt disconnected from the emotional scene, her survival instincts making it difficult to process normal human emotions. The family she remembered existed only in her fragmented memories, while the people before her had been forever changed by grief. Medical evaluations began immediately. Doctors were amazed by Sarah's physical condition considering what she had endured. The head injury had healed completely, though some cognitive effects remained. More concerning were the psychological impacts of her ordeal. Classic symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder combined with survivor's guilt and the unique trauma of being presumed dead by everyone she loved. Military. Psychiatrists struggled to understand her case. Sarah had survived in enemy territory for years without breaking, had adapted to local culture while maintaining her core identity, and had demonstrated remarkable resilience. Yet she also showed signs of profound disconnection from her previous life, as if the person who had been Sarah Mitchell before the explosion was somehow different from the woman who had returned. The debriefing process was extensive and sometimes hostile. Intelligence officials questioned every detail of her captivity and survival, searching for any indication that she had been compromised or turned into an enemy asset. Sarah understood their suspicions but found the interrogations exhausting and demoralizing after everything she had endured. Her commanding officers faced an unprecedented situation. Sarah was officially dead in military records, Her position had been filled, and her security clearances had been revoked. Reintegrating someone with her knowledge and experience into active duty required navigating complex bureaucratic and legal challenges that had no established precedent. Meanwhile, news of her survival began leaking to the media. Despite military efforts to maintain operational security, Sarah found herself at the center of a story that captured national attention. The presumed dead naval officer, who had survived years behind enemy lines through sheer determination and the kindness of Afghan civilians who risked everything to save her. The media attention complicated her recovery process. Reporters camped outside her parents' home, veterans organizations wanted to honor her survival, and book publishers offered substantial contracts for her story. Sarah felt overwhelmed by the public interest in her private trauma and struggled to understand why her survival had become a symbol for others. Her relationship with her parents remained strained despite their joy at her return. The family had processed their grief and moved forward with their lives, developing new routines and relationships around her absence. Her sudden reappearance disrupted the careful equilibrium they had built, creating guilt and confusion alongside relief and happiness. The loss of her brother Mark haunted Sarah's return. She spent hours reading his letters from deployment, trying to understand what his final months had been like, and whether her disappearance had contributed to the emotional state that might have led to his fatal accident. Her parents tried to reassure her, but the guilt felt insurmountable. Physical rehabilitation proved easier than emotional recovery. Sarah's time in the mountains had kept her in excellent physical condition, and she quickly regained the stamina and strength necessary for military operations. Her tactical skills had actually improved during her time in hostile territory, where split-second decisions meant the difference between life and death. However, her psychological evaluations revealed concerning patterns. Sarah had difficulty trusting authority figures, showed hypervigilance that interfered with normal social interactions, and demonstrated an independence that bordered on isolation. Military psychologists worried about her ability to function effectively within the structured environment of naval operations. The Navy faced pressure to either fully reinstate Sarah or provide her with a medical discharge that would allow her to transition to civilian life. Her case had become politically sensitive, with members of Congress calling for her immediate return to active duty, while others questioned whether someone with her psychological profile could safely serve in sensitive positions. Sarah herself remained conflicted about her future. The military had been her identity before the explosion, but her experiences in Afghanistan had fundamentally changed her perspective on conflict, duty, and leadership. She had seen the human cost of war from a completely different angle and understood the complexity of the situation in ways that traditional military training couldn't provide. Her former teammates who had survived her original unit expressed mixed feelings about her return. Some welcomed her back enthusiastically, grateful to have their respected leader alive and potentially available to guide them again. Others felt betrayed by her survival, having processed their grief and guilt over her presumed death in ways that her return now complicated. The SEAL teams she had worked with were similarly divided. Sarah had been instrumental in developing training protocols and tactical approaches that had saved lives, but the units had evolved and adapted in her absence. New leadership had emerged, different strategies had been implemented, and some questioned whether her outdated knowledge would be relevant to current operations. As weeks passed, Sarah realized that her return to military service wouldn't be a simple matter of resuming her previous duties. The Navy had changed. Her role had been permanently filled, and her experiences had given her perspectives that didn't easily fit within traditional military thinking. She would need to prove herself all over again, this time with the added burden of her extraordinary survival story. The decision about her future would ultimately rest with senior naval leadership, but Sarah knew that her unique experiences had prepared her for challenges that conventional military training could never address. Whether the Navy would recognize and utilize those skills remained to be seen, but she was determined to find a way to serve that honored both her survival and the sacrifices of those who hadn't returned home. 6 months after her return, Sarah faced a panel of senior naval officers who would determine her professional future. The conference room at the Pentagon felt sterile and intimidating, compared to the mountain caves and refugee camps she had called home for over 2 years. Admiral Catherine Walsh, the highest-ranking woman in naval operations, led the review board with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. The board had spent weeks reviewing Sarah's case files, psychological evaluations, and intelligence reports. Her survival story was remarkable. But questions remained about her fitness for duty and the security implications of her extended time in enemy territory. Some officials worried that her experiences had compromised her judgment or loyalty, while others saw her unique perspective as potentially valuable. Sarah presented her case with the same tactical precision she had once used to plan military operations. She outlined how her survival experience had enhanced rather than diminished her military capabilities, providing insights into enemy tactics, local population dynamics, and unconventional warfare that no classroom training could match. Her argument was compelling but met with resistance from traditionalists who viewed her unorthodox background as a liability. Commander David Harrison, who had taken over her former position, actively opposed her reinstatement. He argued that her psychological profile showed concerning patterns of independence and authority resistance that could undermine unit cohesion. Harrison had worked hard to establish his own leadership style and viewed Sarah's potential return as a threat to his position and credibility. The psychological evaluations revealed a complex picture. Sarah demonstrated exceptional resilience and adaptability, qualities that were highly valued in special operations. However, she also showed signs of hypervigilance and difficulty with traditional military hierarchy that concerned senior leadership. Her time as an autonomous survivor had taught her to rely primarily on her own judgment, making it unclear how well she would function within a structured command environment. Dr. Elizabeth Chen, the military psychiatrist assigned to Sarah's case, advocated for her return to active duty with appropriate support and gradual reintegration. Dr. Chen argued that Sarah's psychological challenges were manageable and that her unique experiences could benefit the entire special operations community if properly utilized. Her report emphasized Sarah's intellectual capability and emotional strength despite the trauma she had endured. The review process extended for months as different factions within the naval hierarchy debated her fate. Some saw her as a symbol of American resilience who deserved full restoration to her previous rank and position. Others viewed her as a potential security risk, whose unconventional survival raised too many unanswered questions about her loyalty and reliability. During this bureaucratic limbo, Sarah struggled with civilian life. She lived with her parents but felt like a visitor in her own family home. Sleep was difficult due to hypervigilance and nightmares, while normal social interactions felt forced and artificial compared to the life-and-death communication she had grown accustomed to in Afghanistan. She began working unofficially with veterans organizations, helping other soldiers who had experienced trauma in combat zones. Her unique perspective and survival experience resonated with wounded warriors who felt disconnected from civilian society. These interactions helped Sarah understand that her experiences, while extraordinary, shared common elements with other military personnel who had endured extreme situations. The breakthrough in her case came when terrorist attacks in 3 different locations demonstrated tactics that Sarah recognized from her time in Taliban-controlled territory. She provided detailed analysis that helped intelligence agencies understand the operational methods and planning approaches used by the attackers. Her insights proved accurate and valuable, demonstrating the practical applications of her unconventional knowledge. Admiral Walsh scheduled a private meeting with Sarah to discuss her observations about the terrorist incidents. During their conversation, Sarah displayed analytical capabilities and cultural understanding that impressed the senior officer. She could explain enemy motivations and tactical thinking in ways that traditional intelligence reports couldn't capture, providing context that was crucial for developing effective countermeasures. This meeting led to a classified assignment, where Sarah worked with intelligence analysts to develop profiles of terrorist organizations operating in Central and South Asia. Her cultural knowledge and understanding of local population dynamics proved invaluable for predicting enemy behavior and identifying potential recruitment patterns. The assignment was technically civilian consulting rather than active military duty, but it allowed her to contribute meaningfully while the Navy continued evaluating her status. Her work with intelligence services caught the attention of SEAL team commanders who were developing new training protocols for operations in culturally complex environments. Traditional military training focused on tactical skills and weapons proficiency, but recent conflicts had demonstrated the critical importance of cultural understanding and population engagement for mission success. Captain Michael Rodriguez, who commanded several SEAL teams, requested Sarah's assistance in developing cultural awareness training for his units. He had reviewed her survival story and recognized that her experiences provided exactly the kind of real-world knowledge that his teams needed for successful operations in hostile territories where distinguishing between enemies and potential allies was crucial for survival. Sarah's initial sessions with SEAL trainees were met with skepticism and curiosity in equal measure. Many of the operators had heard stories about the naval officer who had survived years behind enemy lines, but they questioned whether her experiences were relevant to their mission profiles. Some resented taking instruction from someone whose military status remained unclear and whose unconventional background didn't fit traditional special operations career paths. However, her teaching methods quickly won over even the most skeptical trainees. Sarah used real-world scenarios and practical exercises that demonstrated how cultural understanding could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. She taught them to read local population dynamics, identify potential allies and threats, and navigate complex tribal and religious relationships that often determined operational outcomes. Her training scenarios were based on actual situations she had encountered during her survival period. She showed trainees how small gestures of respect or cultural awareness could transform hostile situations into opportunities for cooperation, while cultural insensitivity could turn potential allies into dangerous enemies. These lessons were far more impactful than theoretical classroom instruction. The success of her training programs began shifting attitudes within the SEAL community about Sarah's potential value as an active duty officer. Her unconventional background, rather than being a liability, was increasingly seen as a unique asset that could enhance operational effectiveness in complex environments. Young operators particularly appreciated her practical approach and real-world experience. Word of her effective training methods reached senior special operations leadership, including officers who had the authority to influence her reinstatement decision. Her ability to translate survival experience into practical military applications demonstrated that her time behind enemy lines had enhanced rather than compromised her value as a naval officer. The turning point came during a crisis that would test every skill Sarah had developed during her years of survival. Intelligence agencies detected chatter about a planned terrorist attack on American soil, but the information was fragmentary and difficult to interpret. The potential attackers were using communication methods and cultural references that traditional analysts couldn't fully decode. Sarah was brought into the Intelligence Fusion Center as a consultant, working alongside FBI counterterrorism specialists and CIA analysts who were struggling to piece together the threat picture. The intercepts included references to tribal customs and religious practices from the exact region where she had lived for over 2 years, giving her unique insight into the attackers' mindset and operational planning. Her analysis revealed that the planned attack was more sophisticated and imminent than intelligence agencies had initially understood. The terrorists were using cultural and religious calendars to coordinate timing, employing local Afghan customs to hide their communications, and drawing on tribal loyalty networks that extended far beyond what American intelligence had mapped. Working 18-hour days for nearly a week, Sarah helped decode the terrorist communications and identify key players in the network. Her cultural knowledge allowed her to understand references that other analysts missed, while her survival experience helped her think like someone operating in hostile territory with limited resources and constant security concerns. The breakthrough came when Sarah recognized a pattern in the communications that matched tribal conflict resolution methods she had observed while living with Rashid's family. The terrorists were using traditional Afghan negotiation protocols to coordinate their attack planning, assuming that American intelligence wouldn't understand the cultural context behind their messages. Her insights led to the identification of 3 terrorist cells operating in different American cities, each preparing coordinated attacks on transportation infrastructure during a major holiday weekend. The FBI was able to arrest all cell members just days before the planned attacks, preventing what could have been one of the most devastating terrorist incidents since September 11th. The success of this Operation finally convinced senior naval leadership that Sarah's unconventional background was an asset, rather than a liability. Admiral Walsh personally commended her work and recommended her immediate reinstatement to active duty with promotion to the rank of commander. Recognizing both her previous service and her unique capabilities developed through survival experience. However, Sarah's return to active duty wasn't without challenges. Some officers resented her rapid promotion and the attention her survival story had generated. Commander Harrison continued to oppose her reinstatement, arguing that making exceptions for her case would undermine military discipline and established promotion procedures. The SEAL community was divided in their response to her return. Younger operators who had benefited from her training programs welcomed her leadership, while some veteran SEALs questioned whether someone who had been presumed dead should be given command authority over active units. The debate reflected broader tensions within special operations about innovation versus tradition. Sarah's first official assignment was to develop and lead a new cross-cultural operations training program for all special operations forces. This position allowed her to utilize her unique expertise while avoiding direct command of operational units, addressing some concerns about her psychological readiness for traditional leadership roles. The training program she developed revolutionized special operations preparation for overseas deployments. Instead of focusing solely on tactical skills and weapons training, her curriculum emphasized cultural intelligence, population dynamics, and the psychological aspects of operating in hostile foreign environments for extended periods. Her training methods drew heavily on her survival experience, teaching operators how to read social situations, build trust with local populations, and maintain psychological resilience during prolonged isolation. She incorporated lessons learned from her time with Rashid's family about the importance of respect, patience, and genuine cultural curiosity in building relationships that could mean the difference between life and death. The program's effectiveness became apparent during overseas deployments where units trained by Sarah demonstrated significantly better outcomes in population engagement and cultural navigation. Mission success rates improved, civilian casualties decreased, and operators reported feeling better prepared for the psychological challenges of extended operations in foreign environments. Sarah's success in training roles led to requests for her involvement in operational planning for sensitive missions. Her cultural expertise and understanding of enemy psychology proved valuable for predicting how terrorist organizations would respond to American military actions, helping commanders develop more effective strategies. However, she continued to struggle with traditional military bureaucracy and hierarchy. Her survival experience had taught her to trust her own judgment above all else, making it difficult to follow orders that contradicted her assessment of situations. This independence, while valuable in many contexts, sometimes created friction with superior officers who expected unquestioning compliance. Dr. Chen continued working with Sarah to help her navigate these challenges, focusing on developing strategies for functioning effectively within military structure, while maintaining the independence and analytical thinking that made her valuable. The process required careful balance between military discipline and the autonomous decision-making skills that had kept her alive. Her parents gradually adjusted to having their daughter back, but the family dynamics remained complicated. Sarah's survival experience had given her perspectives on life and death that were difficult for civilian family members to understand. She sometimes felt more connected to the Afghan family that had saved her than to her own biological relatives. The media attention surrounding her story created additional pressure. Veterans organizations wanted to use her as a spokesperson, while military recruiters saw her survival narrative as powerful marketing material. Sarah found this commodification of her trauma uncomfortable and tried to maintain privacy while fulfilling her professional obligations. Her relationship with other military personnel evolved as her reputation for cultural expertise grew. Officers who had initially been skeptical began requesting her input on mission planning and training development. Her unique combination of tactical knowledge and cultural understanding made her a valuable resource for complex operations. The Pentagon began considering her for assignments that would take advantage of her specialized knowledge. Potential positions included cultural liaison roles, intelligence analysis positions, and training development responsibilities that could benefit the entire special operations community. Sarah's success in her new role demonstrated that unconventional military careers could produce officers with capabilities that traditional training couldn't replicate. Her survival experience, rather than disqualifying her from service, had created expertise that was increasingly valuable in modern asymmetric warfare environments. As her first year back on active duty concluded, Sarah had proven that her extraordinary survival story was just the beginning of a new chapter in her military career. The question now was whether the Navy would recognize her unique value and provide opportunities that matched her exceptional capabilities. The opportunity Sarah had been waiting for arrived in the form of a crisis that threatened to destabilize an entire region. A joint Navy SEAL and Marine Special Operations Task Force was struggling with a complex mission in Southeast Asia, where traditional military approaches had proven ineffective against an enemy that blended seamlessly with local populations. 3. Previous mission commanders had requested reassignment after failing to make meaningful progress against a sophisticated insurgent network that was using cultural camouflage and local sympathies to avoid detection. The insurgents understood the regional, tribal dynamics and were exploiting American cultural blind spots to maintain operational security. Admiral Walsh personally selected Sarah to take command of the troubled task force, despite objections from some senior officers who felt her unconventional background made her unsuitable for such a sensitive assignment. The Admiral believed that Sarah's unique combination of tactical expertise and cultural understanding made her the only officer capable of breaking the operational stalemate. Sarah's appointment as task force commander sent shockwaves through the special operations community. She was one of the youngest officers ever given such responsibility, and her survival story added an element of uncertainty about how she would perform under the pressure of commanding elite units in active combat operations. Her first meeting with task force personnel was tense and skeptical. Many of the operators had years of combat experience and questioned whether someone who had been presumed dead could effectively lead them in life-and-death situations. Some worried that her survival trauma might affect her decision-making abilities during critical moments. Sarah addressed their concerns directly, acknowledging the legitimate questions about her readiness, while demonstrating the cultural and tactical insights that had convinced senior leadership to give her the command. She outlined her approach to the mission, emphasizing cultural intelligence and population engagement rather than purely kinetic operations. Her strategy represented a fundamental shift from previous approaches. Instead of focusing primarily on hunting down insurgent leaders through raids and surveillance, Sarah proposed a comprehensive, cultural engagement program designed to understand and address the root causes of local support for insurgent activities. The first phase of her plan involved extensive cultural reconnaissance, with small teams embedded in local communities to build relationships and gather intelligence through trust rather than intimidation. This approach required operators to develop language skills, cultural sensitivity, and patience that went far beyond traditional special operations training. Many team members initially resisted this approach, preferring the direct action methods they had been trained for and were comfortable executing. Sarah had to convince hardened warriors that building relationships with village elders and understanding local grievances could be more effective than nighttime raids and interrogations. Her breakthrough came during a village engagement where her cultural knowledge prevented what could have been a diplomatic disaster. Local religious customs required specific protocols for foreign military presence, and Sarah's understanding of these requirements allowed her team to gain access to community leaders who had been avoiding contact with American forces. This successful engagement led to intelligence that revealed the insurgent network's communication methods and safehouse locations. The information was gathered through voluntary cooperation rather than coercion, creating sustainable intelligence relationships that continued providing valuable information over time. Sarah's emphasis on cultural respect and genuine relationship building gradually won over skeptical team members, who saw the practical benefits of her approach. Operators who had initially questioned her methods began requesting additional cultural training to better support the mission objectives. The task force's success rate improved dramatically under Sarah's leadership. Instead of launching raids based on uncertain intelligence, they were able to target insurgent operations with precision that minimized civilian casualties and maximized operational impact. Local populations began actively supporting American operations rather than merely tolerating them. Her leadership style combined the tactical precision expected of special operations commanders with the cultural sensitivity and patience she had learned during her survival experience. She made decisions quickly when necessary, but also understood when situations required careful consideration of cultural and political factors. The success of her cultural engagement strategy attracted attention from senior military and political leadership who were struggling with similar challenges in other theaters of operation. Sarah's methods were being studied and adapted for use in different cultural contexts and operational environments. However, her approach also faced criticism from traditionalists who argued that special operations forces shouldn't be conducting what they viewed as diplomatic or humanitarian missions. Some officers felt that cultural engagement diluted the primary combat mission and made operators vulnerable to manipulation by sophisticated enemies. Sarah defended her methods by pointing to measurable results: increased intelligence gathering, reduced civilian casualties, improved mission success rates, and sustainable operational gains that didn't require constant military presence to maintain. Her metrics demonstrated that cultural engagement enhanced rather than compromised military effectiveness. The political implications of her success were significant. Military and civilian leaders began requesting briefings on her methods, seeking to understand how cultural intelligence could be systematically incorporated into military planning and execution. Sarah found herself becoming an advocate for fundamental changes in special operations doctrine. Her team's reputation grew throughout the special operations community as word spread about their innovative approaches and consistent success. Other units began requesting cross-training with Sarah's task force to learn cultural engagement techniques that could be applied to their own missions. The personal cost of command was substantial for Sarah. The responsibility for the lives of elite operators, combined with the pressure of implementing controversial new tactics, created stress that triggered some of her survival-related trauma responses. She worked closely with Dr. Chen to manage these challenges while maintaining her leadership effectiveness. Her relationship with her family continued to evolve as her military career flourished. Her parents were proud of her achievements but worried about the dangerous nature of her assignments and the psychological toll of command responsibility. They had already grieved her death once and lived with constant anxiety about losing her again. The success of her task force operations led to a formal promotion to full commander and recognition as one of the Navy's most innovative tactical leaders. Her methods were being incorporated into official special operations doctrine, fundamentally changing how American forces approached culturally complex operational environments. Sarah's reputation extended beyond military circles as academic institutions and think tanks began studying her integration of cultural intelligence with tactical operations. She was invited to speak at war colleges and strategic studies programs, sharing insights that bridged the gap between academic theory and practical application. The transformation of her task force from a struggling unit to the most successful special operations team in the region demonstrated the effectiveness of her leadership approach. Team members who had initially doubted her methods became advocates for cultural engagement techniques, spreading her innovations throughout the special operations community. As her command tour neared its end, Sarah faced decisions about her future career path. Senior leadership was considering her for positions that would allow her to influence special operations doctrine on a broader scale, potentially affecting how American forces operated globally in culturally complex environments. The young woman who had been presumed dead years earlier had not only survived an impossible situation but had transformed her trauma into tactical innovation that was reshaping military thinking. Her journey from survival to leadership demonstrated that extraordinary experiences, properly channeled, could produce extraordinary capabilities. Her task force had become a proving ground for new approaches to asymmetric warfare, with operators from other units requesting assignment to learn techniques that were proving successful where traditional methods had failed. Sarah had created a legacy that extended far beyond her personal survival story. The final phase of her current assignment involved training, replacement leadership, and ensuring that the cultural engagement protocols she had developed would continue after her departure. The sustainability of her innovations would be the ultimate test of their value to military operations. As Sarah prepared for her next assignment, she reflected on the journey that had brought her from presumed death to command of elite military units. Her survival experience had initially seemed like a career-ending trauma, but it had actually provided the foundation for leadership capabilities that no traditional training could have developed. Sarah's ultimate test came when she was selected to lead the most challenging assignment of her career, taking command of a joint special operations unit tasked with training and leading indigenous forces in a region where 3 previous commanders had failed catastrophically. The mission was considered nearly impossible, with political implications that reached the highest levels of government. The assignment required Sarah to work with local military leaders who had deep suspicions about American intentions and cultural understanding. Previous commanders had relied heavily on technological superiority and traditional military hierarchy, approaches that had alienated local partners and undermined operational effectiveness. Sarah arrived at the remote training facility with a small team of operators who had worked with her during her previous successful command. The base was located in mountainous terrain that reminded her powerfully of the Afghan landscape, where she had learned to survive, bringing back memories that were both painful and strategically valuable. Her first meeting with local military leaders was conducted according to cultural protocols she had learned during her survival years. She demonstrated respect for their customs, spoke portions of their language, and approached the partnership as equals working toward common goals, rather than Americans training inferior forces. The local commanders were initially skeptical but intrigued by Sarah's cultural knowledge and genuine respect for their expertise. Unlike previous American leaders who had dismissed local tactical knowledge, Sarah actively sought to learn from indigenous fighting methods that had been developed over generations of conflict in the region. Her training program integrated traditional American special operations techniques with local tactical knowledge, creating hybrid approaches that were more effective than either method alone. Local forces taught American operators about terrain navigation and camouflage techniques, while Americans shared advanced weapon systems and communication technologies. The cultural exchange went beyond tactical matters as Sarah encouraged her operators to learn local languages, customs, and social structures. This investment in cultural understanding paid dividends as trust developed between American and indigenous forces, creating genuine partnerships rather than superficial cooperation. The program's first major test came when intelligence indicated an imminent attack on a civilian population center that could only be prevented through coordinated action between American and local forces. The operation required perfect coordination and mutual trust under extreme pressure. Sarah's cultural preparation proved crucial during the mission planning phase. She was able to navigate complex tribal politics that affected operational security, ensure that the attack plan respected local cultural sensitivities, and coordinate timing with local religious and social calendars that previous commanders had ignored. The joint operation was executed flawlessly, preventing a massacre and capturing key insurgent leaders through coordinated actions that neither American nor local forces could have accomplished independently. The success demonstrated the effectiveness of Sarah's cultural integration approach and established her reputation as a transformational leader. Word of the successful operation reached the highest levels of military and political leadership, with Sarah's methods being studied as a model for future international partnerships. Her approach was being considered for implementation in other regions where American forces worked with local partners. The personal cost of her success continued to challenge Sarah as command responsibilities triggered trauma responses related to her survival experience. The pressure of making life-and-death decisions for both American and local forces sometimes overwhelmed her carefully developed coping mechanisms. Dr. Chen worked with Sarah remotely to help her manage the psychological challenges of command, while maintaining the cultural sensitivity and tactical innovation that made her effective. The support was crucial for sustaining her leadership during the most demanding phases of the mission. Her relationship with her family evolved as they came to understand the significance of her work and the unique capabilities she had developed through her survival experience. Her parents began to see her extraordinary journey as having a purpose that extended beyond personal survival to meaningful contribution to military effectiveness and international cooperation. The success of her current assignment led to offers for senior positions that would allow her to influence military doctrine and training on a global scale. Sarah was being considered for roles that would let her transform how American forces approached culturally complex operations worldwide. Her former teammates from her original unit, those who had survived the years since her presumed death, reached out to congratulate her on her achievements and express their pride in serving with someone who had overcome impossible circumstances to become an innovative leader. The Afghan family that had saved her life maintained contact through secure communication channels, sharing news about their community and expressing pride in what their former patient had accomplished. Sarah continued supporting their village through humanitarian aid programs she had helped establish. As her current assignment neared completion, Sarah was promoted to the rank of captain and selected for a position at the Pentagon, where she would develop new doctrine for cultural integration in special operations. Her survival story had become the foundation for military innovations that would affect American operations for decades. The journey from presumed death to senior military leadership had transformed not only Sarah's life but also influenced how American forces approached international partnerships and cultural engagement. Her experience demonstrated that extraordinary circumstances could produce extraordinary capabilities when properly channeled. Sarah's story became required reading at military academies and war colleges, not as an inspirational tale but as a case study in how cultural intelligence and psychological resilience could be developed and applied to complex operational challenges. The young naval officer who had been thrown from an exploding vehicle in Afghanistan had become one of the most influential tactical innovators of her generation. Her presumed death had been the beginning, rather than the end of her most important contributions to military service. Standing in the Pentagon office where she would soon work to transform special operations doctrine, Sarah reflected on the impossible journey that had brought her from survival to command. Her experience had proven that the most valuable military capabilities often emerged from the most challenging circumstances. The woman who had walked back from the dead had not simply resumed her military career, she had revolutionized it, demonstrating that survival experience could be transformed into leadership innovation that would benefit countless future operations and save countless lives. Her story continued to inspire military personnel facing their own impossible circumstances, proving that survival was not the end of service, but potentially the beginning of extraordinary contribution. Sarah Mitchell had not only survived the unsurvivable, but had used that experience to become exactly the leader her country needed for the complex challenges of modern warfare.